that trio here. And then on Paul's side, we see that Sun, but paired with that Umbreon as well. Both of these teams really interesting. I'm really excited to see how this shakes up.
Yeah, and you know, one thing I really love about the Players' Cup is seeing how it gives players an opportunity to really shine, right? Some players, for example, Paul and Joseph have been playing and are, you know, very well renowned, but their opponents maybe don't have as many accomplishments to their names, but have brought some really cool teams and obviously have made it this far in the tournament. So it's always really exciting to see kind of new players come up and, you know, just show us their team building ability and their battling. So yeah, I think we're ready to get started with this one. I think looking from Paul's team, Regieleki looks super good. Preston actually doesn't have any electric resist or immune, so I think that Regieleki is going to be a really, really big problem for him to deal with. So I think speed control is going to be the name of the game in this one.
On Preston's side, sending out the Zapdos and the Urshifu single strike to start. And then on Paul's side, that Regieleki you were just talking about, as well as that Groudon, which will be setting the Sun here.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, the Electroweb combination here is really scary, right? Because Regieleki actually outspeeds everything on Preston's team, and Preston doesn't have a fake out user to deny that Electroweb. So the thing is, Paul found this really good lead, Eleki plus Groudon, because he recognizes, hey, Groudon actually just does really well offensively into Preston's entire team, especially if I can actually get those Electrowebs off before my opponent can move, right? So here, from Preston's end, you know, Urshifu may want to consider going for a Sucker Punch onto Eleki or go for a Protect. If not, then we saw Paul's move, you know, it's just going to feint to a double up. That's actually so tough for Preston then, because then the Groudon also moves before Zapdos. You get a special defense boost via Max Quake, and I feel like Paul's team, just this Eleki plus Groudon combination alone matches up really well against anything that's not Dynamax from Preston's end. So Preston, given this lead matchup, really has to do his best to stall out Paul's Dynamax without losing too much, and ideally give himself some good speed control so that later on he can outspeed after the first couple of turns are over with the Pokemon that he has.
Both of these players opting to Dynamax first turn here. Sure enough, we see that Electroweb coming out from that Regieleki. It is going to be dropping the speed of both this Urshifu and the Zapdos, allowing this Groudon to go for a big Max Quake into the Urshifu, and unfortunately just take it right out of this match, not having any opportunity. I know you're talking about the Sucker Punch, but unfortunately, no, opting not to go for it, and is just going to be knocked out instead.
Yeah, I think that's honestly a dream turn for Paul. Max Airstream comes out, sure, but, you know, targets the Groudon. Look how little damage Groudon takes after that Max special defense boost. I mean, this is why, like, you know, this Eleki just by itself is already such a problem, and then the Groudon is just such a perfect partner for it. And without any fake out, without any main good speed control from Preston's end other than this Max Airstream, really difficult to deal with. So Entei comes in, but once again, you know, the Airstream basically puts Zapdos back at neutral, and like he's still free to just spam those Electrowebs, right? And like, I think the play that Paul's making here, doubling up onto Entei, super safe. If Entei protects, so be it. Zapdos at best gets another Max Airstream off, maybe a Max Flare into Regieleki, and if Max Flare can actually get that one-hit KO, that would actually be a really big deal. But if Eleki is Focus Sash, then you're not going to be able to, you know, actually pick up that knockout. So it is going to be the Protect from Entei, you know, kind of weather the storm a little bit, but this is just such a good lead for Paul, and once again, it's going to be that Electroweb coming out.
Yeah, just the pure offense that Paul is able to bring right off of the gate here, and those Max Quake special defense boosts, huge against this Zapdos. I mean, there's the target into the Entei with the Quake, but even through the Protect, actually doing a lot of damage and still getting those boosts. So the Zapdos is not actually really putting too much offensive pressure on. And just going to go for another Airstream, just trying to get a little bit of speed back again into the ground. It's not even bringing it down to half though at this point, which I don't know, it's not looking too fantastic.
No, definitely not. I mean, part of it is that this Zapdos doesn't have something like a Life Orb, right? So what's interesting here is that you have given Entei a speed boost. I'm not sure how, you know, both trainers have trained their respective Pokemon, but, you know, even with the speed boost, like, there is the potential that Regieleki can actually still outspeed that Entei. However, Paul just opting for the safe Protect here, just wants to guarantee that Eleki, you know, hangs on after this turn. That makes a lot of sense, because you might want to Electroweb that Zacian that might be waiting in the back. So Protect, just make sure, you know, you don't take any damage here. It looks like Entei is going to target into the Eleki, so great Protect there from Paul.
Zapdos going for a third Airstream. Finally bringing the Groudon down to the yellow there with that critical hit. All things considered, still really didn't do too much damage though. And the Groudon is going to get that recovery from the Citrus Berry, bringing it back to almost where it was.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to spend 3 turns of your Dynamax doing around 50% of damage to a Groudon, and in the end, that's basically what happened. So, I think Paul has basically played every turn safely. He has a team advantage, and he has executed that team advantage really well. I think Preston has honestly done everything he can for the most part. It's just tough. This Alecki hasn't even gotten damaged off yet, and or taken any damage onto him. That's kind of the problem here, right? So Zacian is in the back, but the problem is that this Regieleki is still able to put on pressure with Electro Web. And after a single Electro Web and you drop that Zacian speed, Paul still has 2 Pokemon in the back. And there's all these special defense boosts on both of these Pokemon. Like, Paul just has so many options to work with right now. So I think with Alecki, you just want to guarantee a speed drop onto both of these. And yeah, Paul just double checking the stats here, but Electro Web feels really consistent because that paves the way for, as you see, Charizard in the back, as well as that Incineroar. And Incineroar is such a good switching here, right? You get that Intimidate off against Zacian. You also put on Fake Out pressure next turn, and the numbers advantage just feels so big right now for Paul. Each Intimidate drastically decreases Zacian's damage output as well. So Preston definitely in kind of a pickle here right now.
100%. The Zacian going for a Protect here. So no speed drop, but we are going to see that Electro Web into the Zapdos here. The Zapdos just trying to build its speed up with these max airstreams, but just getting dropped back down again. Zapdos with that Heat Wave, just going for some chip damage, barely doing anything to this Incineroar, and honestly not too much to this Regieleki either, considering all the special defense boosts that it has.
Yeah, it's rare to see Regieleki actually take attacks well in general, because it's considered one of the most frail Pokemon in this format, but yeah, only takes 40 damage there. Paul going for the safe Fake Out plus Thunderbolt play. I really like this because it's just, a guaranteed KO here on slow Zapdos. No reason to risk something like an Electro Web miss, so just by far the most consistent option that he had here. Even if Zapdos protects there, well, Thunderbolt next turn will just finish it off anyway. Now it's a 4v1. This poor Zacian really can't do very much at all, especially after a single Intimidate. This is why Intimidate is so common in the format, especially in Incineroar. Otherwise Zacian would really just run over so many different teams, and that's why you see players often opt for Pokemon like Incineroar or Landorus Therian to kind of deal with it. But I mean, that was a really well played game on Paul's end, and I think Preston just didn't have too many options starting from the lead. So I think he really has to maybe adjust his lead matchup or consider protecting on the first turn with Urshifu or whatever other Pokemon he brings next to that Zapdos potentially. It's really tough though, because Suicune can set up Tailwind, but you really want to bring Suicune up against an Alecki and a Groudon that's going to max against you. Maybe not. And then there's that Metagross in the back, but that doesn't also feel like a very good option for Preston. So I feel like Preston's kind of locked into the 4 Pokemon he brought. He just needs to maybe adjust his game plan. Consider, just not losing a Pokemon for free the way turn 1 happened in that last game, because that just really snowballed so quickly.
Definitely seems like a bit of an uphill battle. I mean, just the sheer pressure that Paul was able to put on with that Groudon and getting the speed control of the Regieleki. Unfortunately, the Zapdos wasn't able to do much, and Paul was just free to start targeting down anything that was next to that Zapdos until it was able to just take out the Zapdos at the end and really isolate that Zacian. So that being said, I'm really excited to see what Preston can do in this second game, see how he switches it up, and let's just get to it.
Yeah, let's get into it. I think part of this maybe don't keep max airstreaming Groudon. Alecki might actually be a better target, right? Because you saw how little max airstream is doing, especially when Groudon's getting these special defense boosts. One thing that's actually really critical to consider is that there is that Zacian in the back, right? So if you can prevent that from getting Electro Web, then in the late game, it can actually outspeed a lot of Paul's Pokemon. So kind of just try to deal with the Alecki early on so that you won't get speed drops later on in the match. Now this time we see the Entei adjustment from Preston's end, which I definitely like, because, it actually puts on a fair amount of offensive pressure just with something like its fire type attacks, like Sacred Fire, for example. And so in this position, if you're Preston, you might want to consider protecting Entei this time around, because you don't want to take just an Electro Web plus Max Quake combo, exactly like what happened in turn 1 of that last game. So we'll see if Entei actually has the protect here. Some players like to run Assault Vest on Entei, for example. But I imagine if you're leading Entei here, you want to play a little bit differently than how that last game went. I like the idea of also conserving that Urshifu, because late game Wicked Rolls or Sucker Punches I think are more valuable than most other regular attacks that Preston may have.
Yeah, Preston going yet again with that turn 1 Dynamax with that Zapdos, matching Paul's turn 1 Dynamax with this Groudon. A little bit similar here. But, I mean, on Nepal's end, going for those Quakes early on, especially against that Zapdos, his partners was just so strong. How could he not really go for that? And Zapdos, I feel like, is one of the only ways with this lead to be trying to get any sort of speed control against that Regieleki.
All right, it is going to be Protect this time around, so, you know, weathering the storm a little bit more, and I think that's exactly the adjustment Preston needed to make, at least to not lose too many resources early on, which is great for him. So the Electro Web comes out once again, but does confirm that the Entei actually has Protect and is not going to faint this turn. And actually, this is really cool. If the Zapdos is going for a max Airstream, you boost Entei's speed, which means then, you know, you can outspeed the Groudon next turn, even if a Lucky goes for an Electro Web.
So let's see where this Zapdos is targeting into with the Airstream. It is going to be hitting into the Regieleki instead of the Groudon this time around. So it is picking up about a half of the health here. I mean, the Quake Boost is really helping out the Regieleki here, but I mean, it's more damage than would have happened to the Groudon, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lecky actually going for a Protect here, you know, trying to bypass any damage, you know, expecting Preston to maybe target into that slot once again. But Entei does not fall for it this time around. That's going to be a Life Orb, Sacred Fire, onto the Groudon, but no burn, which is actually huge. A burn there would have been very detrimental for Paul.
Airstream as well, going into the Groudon this time around, bringing it to just below half and starting to get a bit more speed on Preston's side of the field here. Barry is going to go off on Paul's side to start gaining some of that health back, but Preston's slowly trying to build up that speed control and is starting to get those boosts now that Regieleki did Protect. The Max Quake will go into the Entei and unfortunately clean that up, getting another special defense boost on Paul's side.
I think Preston is definitely in a better spot than he was in the last game, and I think like the adjustments made in this game were really smart. Love the decision to bring Entei, great Protect on the first turn, great play to double up onto the Groudon this last turn. I mean, he's basically played as well as he can, right, given the scenario. I think, once again, this matchup feels a little bit more in Paul's favor. This Aleki plus Groudon combination are just so difficult to deal with, but I think Preston's basically doing everything he can to, you know, fight back. And so here, you know, you put on pressure, maybe a Sucker Punch onto the Aleki. Paul doesn't want to feint to that Sucker Punch, so actually makes a heads-up switch here, switching into Incineroar. You get that Intimidate off against the Urshifu. You also pressure with Fake Out next turn, and you don't, you know, feint from a potential Sucker Punch. And looks like Urshifu did go for that Sucker Punch there.
Unfortunate for Preston, and that Airstream is going to hit into that Incineroar, is dealing a good amount of damage. I really like that swap too, saving the Regieleki for later, as well as not getting knocked out from that Sucker Punch damage. The Quake will be going into the Urshifu, picking up a lot of damage here, bringing it down to the red. I mean, it's a tough position for Preston to be in.
Yeah, definitely takes so much damage on that Urshifu, and Paul bringing in that Incineroar now, has that Fake Out pressure, has that Aleki in the back as well, which is really important. But what's interesting this time around is that the Zapdos is actually really speedy. It's gotten multiple speed boosts off, and it actually hasn't taken too much damage at this point. So Paul in this position, you know, definitely has the numbers advantage. That Urshifu is also dangerously low from Preston's end. But Preston here definitely has some options. I mean, you might be worried about Fake Out for this turn from Incineroar, right? So you could just double Protect. Paul looks like actually is not opting for that Fake Out option and might actually get punished for it. It's going to be Thunderbolt into that Incineroar. And let's see.
The double target into that Incineroar is going to clean it up. Really interested about the no Fake Out option, and unfortunately, because of that, the Incineroar is going to be going down here.
Yeah, that's oh, that was a Rock Slide miss, I think, onto the Urshifu. And I can't help but wonder if it connected. I mean, Urshifu's at what, 15%, had a defense drop, maybe actually would have picked up the knockout there. But I think the main thing here is, yeah, the lack of Fake Out means like Preston there is able to get damage off with both of his Pokemon. And now you have a Zapdos that's speedy, right? So Aleki doesn't have its boost anymore. You could just go for something like a Heat Wave here potentially and just knock out that Regieleki. And we know that Regieleki didn't Protect, so here's Heat Wave. Is it enough to just KO?
It does. Regieleki is going down. Fastest Pokemon in the game, unfortunately, is not doing too much against the Zapdos with all of these speed boosts. That Rock Slide is going to connect onto the Zapdos, though. No speed boost can help it here, and unfortunately, it is going down.
Yeah, so I mean, really big deal there at the end of the day that Zapdos was faster and was able to knock out the Alecki, right? Because now Paul's actually in such an awkward spot where you don't have Sun around anymore, and Preston's Pokemon are actually faster, right? Or the Zacian's faster than both of these. The Charizards most of the time are going to outspeed Urshifu, assuming that they're both max speed here. But this time around, Zacian comes out, and Zacian loves these late game scenarios where it doesn't have to worry as much. And actually, I think that Urshifu might have had a speed boost from that max Airstream. Yeah, I think that's the case. Then it will just outspeed the Charizard and the Groudon here. So I think Preston in a commanding spot. You really want the Sun up normally for Charizard, but without Sun, I think the Zacian can actually even take a Heat Wave. So yeah, I think since the Urshifu is faster here, you can just Wicked Blow into the Charizard, go for the Blade onto the Groudon. It's a really, really safe play. Paul's play here, I mean, maybe you protect the Groudon, hope to survive a Wicked Blow from the Urshifu, and then get a Heat Wave, burn or crit onto the Zacian. I think that's maybe your best bet, but looks like, here, he's not opting for that protect. So Preston definitely, adjusting the game plan a little bit, and being able to pick up that knockout onto Regieleki with Heat Wave was huge.
Urshifu here with that Wicked Blow, targeting into the Charizard, bringing it down to just 13 HP. Charizard just holding on. The Behemoth Blade from that Zacian, targeting into the ground here, and is going to pick up that KO. So it's all going to come down to this Charizard with that Heat Wave and seeing what damage it's going to be picking up here.
Oh. It's a lot, but it's not enough without the Sun and the solar power, and I think it actually feigns from Life Orb here. So yeah, Paul may be needing a critical hit there onto, in that endgame to actually get the win. But I mean, that was really, really close. I think Preston played that really well, to be honest. And, Paul was making relatively safe plays across the board. Wondering if he maybe forgot the fact that the Zapdos had multiple speed boosts and was just going to outspeed the Alecki there in that endgame. That was a really big deal because you just get that Heat Wave off, Alecki doesn't get an Electro Web off, and then in the end, Preston was able to just, outspeed in that endgame. So I think Preston played that game really, really well. It's a tough matchup to maneuver, and I think he definitely made the right adjustments given how different that game one looked.
Oh, 100%. The speed control really that Preston was able to bring. I mean, I'm pretty sure if that Regieleki was able to get that Electro Web off later in the game, that could have been a very different outcome. But Preston, recognizing the importance of the speed control in that matchup, was able to just go for all of those Airstreams to put himself in a position that he could close out that match. Really interested to see if Paul changes something up going into this third game, or is just going to be maneuvering this matchup a little differently. I mean, the Groudon Regieleki start is so strong, but if you're not picking up the win, then you might have to reevaluate a little bit if there's something different to be bringing against Preston here.
Yeah, definitely. I think Alecki and Groudon still is really consistent, so I like that lead from Paul's end. Maybe you just adjust how you play the first two turns a little bit. It's really essential Alecki actually stays around and consistently outspeeds everything on Preston's end, so conserving that Alecki is going to be important, whether you protect it early on, or just make sure that it doesn't faint within the first two turns, or just not let Zapdos get so many max Airstream boosts off. So let's jump into the third game. I kind of expect to see most of the same Pokemon from the players, but I think it's just going to play out a little bit differently, since it does feel like a lot of these Pokemon are just the best for this matchup. So it's going to be that Zapdos Entei lead again, and here we go. Regieleki and Groudon. This looks familiar.
Very familiar. But I'm very interested to see how the players are going to maneuver this lead this time around, especially on Paul's end here. Looks like he's going to go just lock in right away to that Max Quake onto the Entei here. And yet again, very, very familiar scene as both players opting to max.
Yeah, what's interesting here is the Regieleki is actually protecting, so this could be huge, right? If Preston moves into this and you go for a max Airstream and a Sacred Fire into the Groudon slot immediately, you actually get such a big lead, especially if you actually end up getting a burn onto the Groudon. But if you, for example, double up onto the Alecki and then Paul just gets the KO onto Entei, it feels so tough. Like, once again, the dynamic of this matchup is that I think it favors Paul more, just because the Alecki and Groudon match up so well type-wise, and Preston doesn't have that much that can actually one-shot them, or even do that much damage to them. So for Preston, it feels like you kind of need to call every turn correctly, whereas for Paul, all it takes is one good read and it gives you such a big advantage. So let's see if this Protect Gambit pays off for him.
All right, Regieleki, of course, with that Protect. The Entei hitting into the Regieleki. as well as the Zapdos with the max airstream.
Oh,
also
wow.
into the Regieleki, trying to just take it out of this game right away, but Paul with that protect, and unfortunately Preston does get that speed boost, but isn't really doing too much else on this turn.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big protect on Paul's end there. He hadn't been, playing that defensively with the Lecky in the last couple of games, at least on turn 1. So instead of just going for Electro Web this time around, reads into the potential of a double up. And I like both plays for both players there. I think Preston recognizes, hey, I really should just try to get a Lecky out of the field as quickly as possible. Paul also recognizes that and says, neither of us have made this play on turn 1 before. I'm going to go for the protect, and if they double up into it, we're in a really, really good spot. So I think, that is a phenomenal turn for Paul there. Makes that read correctly, and it makes this match so much more difficult for Preston now, honestly, because like I said, once again, the matchup is just not very heavily favored towards him. So you've got that Urshifu out. That Zapdos has a speed boost, but I'm not sure it's even going to outspeed Regieleki if Regieleki here is max speed. And so, yeah, Aleki's still able to go first, gets that Electro Web off, and I mean, that's such a big deal. Just a single Electro Web to drop both of these Pokemon's speed greatly helps Paul out.
Oh, for sure. Zapdos with that max airstream into the Regieleki. I mean, still with these Quake boosts, it's not doing as much damage as it needs to, but it is going to get a speed boost onto your Shifu with that Wicked Blow, targeting into the Regieleki, and Regieleki is finally out of here. Big
It's out,
KO
but
there.
Yeah, it's a big KO. The question I have to ask here is just like whether or not it's too late for that, right? Because this time around, Paul still has another turn of Dynamax left. He also has presumably that Incineroar in the back, so you can bring that in immediately just to deal with that Zacian, which Preston surely has in the back. And yeah, we see Paul's back too. It's going to be the Instant Charizard. I think you always want to bring out Incineroar here, get that Intimidate off, pressure with Fake Out as well. And now Preston's in such a tough spot, right? Do you go for the Protect on Zacian expecting a Fake Out and a Max Quake into that slot? Because that's a very safe opportunity from Paul's end. If you Protect, though, Paul could make, play on top of that, and for example, Max Rockfall Flare Blitz into Zapdos, or even Max Rockfall Parting Shot into Zapdos, you'd always split your damage here as well. And yeah, he's not going to go for that Fake Out. Looks like he wants to opt for a Parting Shot onto Zapdos and Quake onto Zacian. I really like that play because I think it really covers all of your bases at this point. Also, if you manage to bring in that Charizard and get a special defense boost onto it, well, that means that the Zapdos might potentially miss out on a KO with something like Thunderbolt later on. So the tough thing with Zacian is that Fake Out is really strong against it, and we kind of saw that in the last game too, right? So it is going to opt for that Protect, but we know that Paul didn't launch that Fake Out into that slot. So Paul making a really nice play to just cover all of his bases here.
Zapdos with that max airstream into the Incineroar, about half health here. I mean, I have to wonder too with that Charizard in the back. Last game we saw that Charizard coming out a little late, not really being able to utilize the sun. With this Parting Shot, it will be able to go into that Charizard a little sooner rather than later and really get some pressure with those Heat Waves, which I think might put a lot of pressure out here.
Yeah, and the Parting Shot here, dropping Zapdos' stats is really critical. Zapdos actually does not get the special defense boost because Instin's going to actually switch out after Groudon, but what this means is that Paul gets that free switch into Zapdos, and I really like that play once again from Paul's end because it really covers your bases. I don't think a Behemoth Blade and a Max Airstream would have KO'd Groudon anyway because of that Intimidate onto Zacian and looking at how bulky Groudon was. And so, unless Zacian has something like Substitute there's really no way to get out of that position from Paul's end. Paul already has a numbers advantage. Now you've weakened the Zapdos as well. You've got Charizard out in a better position. Like you mentioned, Sierra wasn't able to do that much in that last game. I mean, it was close, but at that point, Charizard was already so far behind. This time around, Charizard's in a much better spot. Also, Zapdos is at -1 special attack, and so I'm not even sure if Thunderbolt will be able to KO the Charizard. So from Preston's end, I think you need a double up on this Charizard at least. Try to hope for a KO onto that slot, and then hope for misses right now from the Groudon, because Groudon is relying on Rock Slide and Preston's Blades. Both of those attacks are a little bit inaccurate, but I think you have to try to go for the knockout onto Charizard. Paul, of course, though, could read into that Protect the Charizard, so we'll see. But it's going to be Thunderbolt coming out first.
All right, Thunderbolt connecting with the Charizard, bringing it down to 31 HP. This Zacian with the Behemoth Blade, and it is going to target into the Groudon here.
Oh, Groudon.
Picking up a lot of damage, but this gives the Charizard the opportunity to be going for Heat Wave and picks up a double KO here, taking both of these Pokemon out of the battle. And Paul's gonna take that.
Yeah, you know, I think this was going to be a really tough game for Preston after turn 1 because Paul made that really nice read with Protect. But I think this was a fun set to watch. I mean, first of all, credits to Preston because Pokemon often does feel like, you know, how well you execute your matchups. Paul is a player that, you know, is super strong. So just because you have a good matchup doesn't mean that you'll necessarily win the game. You still have to execute correctly. And execution was what mattered there in that turn 1 of game 3 from Paul's end, really going for that Protect. And so, like we were saying earlier, I mean, all it takes is one really good turn for Paul and he'll really kind of just like snowball the game very quickly. That's kind of what happened in both game 1 and game 3. And I felt like, you know, Preston did everything that he could in his power. It's just as soon as you fall into that big of a deficit against Paul's team and the way your teams match up specifically, there's really not much he could do. And it's not like he even could have had like a significantly better Pokemon adjustment like Sweeping or Metagross. Both of those feel really subpar in the matchup. So I really think Marco did a good job, you know, fighting as much as he can in the end of the day. He just really needed to kind of get some of those turn 1s correctly in those losses. And I think that win is an example of how you can potentially maneuver out of what looks like a really tough matchup on paper, but you have to make a lot of right predictions and a lot of right calls.
Yeah, that game 2 was so good from Preston's end, though. You said this did not look like a very good matchup, but played it so well and really gave Paul a run for his money. And the fact that it was brought down to a game 3 against these two